I'm so glad you're here. Before we start, I need you to know that what I'm about to tell you is the kind of story that doesn't just change a life, it shatters it into a million pieces and forces you to rebuild yourself from the dust. If you're watching this, please settle in, because this isn't just about a car at a motel. It's about the terrifying realization that the person sleeping next to you every night might be a complete and utter stranger. It started with a scent. Isn't that how it always begins? Something small, something you almost dismiss. For me, it was the smell of lavender and something else, something metallic and cold, clinging to the collar of my husband Mark's suit jacket. It wasn't his scent. Mark smelled of cedarwood and old books, a comforting, earthy aroma that had been the backdrop of my life for 12 years. This new scent was alien. It was the smell of a secret. For the last 6 months, Mark had been a ghost in our home. He was a senior project manager at a high-flying tech firm, a job he loved, but it had recently become an all-consuming monster. The late nights, the emergency weekend meetings, the constant buzzing of his work phone at our dinner table, it all started when Evelyn Vance took over as the new CEO. She was a legend in Silicon Valley, a woman known for her brutal efficiency and her take-no-prisoners approach to business. Mark spoke of her with a kind of terrified reverence. "She's a genius, Clara," he'd say, his eyes wide. "But she's intense. She expects nothing less than perfection." I tried to be the supportive wife, I really did. I'd have a hot meal waiting for him, no matter how late he came home. I'd listen to his endless talk about quarterly reports and product rollouts, nodding and smiling even when my mind was screaming from boredom and loneliness. Our life, once a vibrant tapestry of shared dreams and inside jokes, had faded into a monochrome painting of his career. The real crack in the foundation appeared on our anniversary. I'd spent weeks planning the perfect evening. I'm an event planner by trade, so my standards are high. I had booked a table at the same little Italian restaurant where he'd proposed, the one with the checkered tablecloths and the owner who always remembered our names. I bought a new dress, a deep sapphire blue that matched my eyes. I spent an hour on my hair and makeup, wanting to remind him of the woman he'd fallen in love with, not just the woman who managed his household. I waited at that table for 2 hours. The candle between us burned down to a sad little puddle of wax. The owner kept giving me sympathetic looks. My phone remained silent. Finally, at 10 p.m., a text message blinked onto my screen. "So sorry, babe. Evelyn called a last-minute emergency board meeting. Unavoidable. Rain check?" There was no phone call, no frantic apology, just a casual, dismissive text. Rain check. As if 12 years of marriage could be postponed like a dentist appointment. I drove home in a haze of humiliation and heartbreak. The sapphire dress felt like a costume for a fool. When I walked into our house, the silence was deafening. Mark wasn't there. He didn't come home until dry stumbling and reeking of expensive whiskey and that same sharp, lavender metallic scent. He mumbled something about a stressful meeting and collapsed into bed, fully clothed. The next morning, he acted as if nothing had happened. He presented me with a ridiculously expensive necklace, the kind you buy out of guilt, not love. "Happy anniversary, Clara," he said with a bright, manufactured smile. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw the necklace in his face and demand to know who he was with, what that meeting was really about. But I didn't. I just smiled back, a brittle, fragile thing, and said, "Thank you, Mark. It's beautiful." Because that's what I did. I smoothed things over. I kept the peace. I told myself I was being paranoid. He was just stressed. Evelyn Vance was demanding. I was just lonely. But the seed of doubt had been planted, and it grew with every clipped phone call he took in the other room, every time he angled his laptop screen away from me, every time that alien lavender scent clung to his clothes. The final straw came a month later. It was a Tuesday. Mark had called to say he was driving up to a conference in the city and would be staying overnight. "It's a huge deal, Clara. A presentation for some major investors. Evelyn wants the whole team there to prep." I wished him luck, told him I loved him, and hung up, the familiar knot of loneliness tightening in my stomach. Later that evening, I was driving home from a client meeting, a long, draining affair about floral arrangements for a wedding. I took a different route, a back road to avoid the freeway traffic. It wound past a string of cheap, run-down motels, the kind of places with buzzing neon signs and names like the Starlight Inn or the Sleepy Hollow. And that's when I saw it, parked right in front of room number 7. Mark's car, a gleaming black Audi, a car so out of place in this sea of rusted pickup trucks and beat-up sedans, it might as well have been a spaceship. My heart didn't just drop. It plummeted. It crashed through the floor of my chest and landed somewhere in the pit of my stomach. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. It couldn't be. He was supposed to be at a 5-star hotel in the city, prepping for the biggest presentation of his career. What in God's name was he doing here? At this no-tell motel on the edge of town? My mind raced, supplying 100 different horrible scenarios, each one more painful than the last. He was meeting someone. He had a secret life. Everything I thought I knew was a lie. I pulled my car over across the street, my breath coming in short, ragged gasps. I sat there for what felt like an eternity, just staring at his car under the flickering, sickly yellow light of the motel sign. My first instinct was to drive away, to go home, crawl into bed, and pretend I had seen nothing. Ignorance is bliss, right? But the event planner in me, the part that needs details, that needs to control the narrative, couldn't let it go. I had to know. With a resolve I didn't know I possessed, I got out of my car. My legs felt like lead, but I forced them to move, one step after another, across the cracked asphalt. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and exhaust fumes. The only sound was the crunch of gravel under my feet and the frantic, guilty pounding of my own heart. I walked up to room number 7. The curtains were drawn tight, but a sliver of light escaped from the bottom, casting a long, thin line on the dirty concrete. I could hear the faint, muffled sound of a television inside. My hand trembled as I raised it to knock. What would I even say? What would I do if he opened the door with another woman? But then, I noticed something. The door wasn't fully latched. It was ajar, just a fraction of an inch. A wave of cold dread washed over me. What if something was wrong? What if he was in trouble? All the anger was momentarily replaced by a surge of fear for his safety. Taking a deep, shaky breath, I pushed the door open. The room was dark, lit only by the bluish glow of the TV screen. It smelled stale, like cheap cigarettes and desperation. And standing there, in the middle of the room, wasn't Mark. It was his boss, Evelyn Vance. She was alone, holding a briefcase. And when she turned to look at me, her face was a mask of cold, calculated shock. But the real gut punch, the thing that made the air leave my lungs in a single, silent scream, wasn't that she was there. It was what she was doing. She was meticulously counting enormous stacks of $100 bills, laying them out on the dingy motel bedspread like a banker preparing a vault. And right then, I knew. This was so much bigger, so much darker, than a simple affair. If my story has already grabbed you, and you want to follow me down this rabbit hole to uncover the truth, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button right now. Ring the notification bell too, because you are not going to want to miss a single second of what happens next. Trust me, we're just getting started. The silence in that motel room was a living thing. It was thick and heavy, punctuated only by the low drone of a late-night talk show on the television and the frantic, chaotic symphony playing inside my own head. My mind was a whirlwind, desperately trying to process the impossible scene in front of me. Evelyn Vance? Mark's terrifying, brilliant, ice queen of a boss, standing in a flea-bag motel room surrounded by what looked like a king's ransom in cash. My first thought, the one that flashed through my brain like lightning, was that I had stumbled into a kidnapping. Mark had been taken, and this was the ransom drop. My heart hammered against my ribs, a wild bird trapped in a cage. I scanned the room for any sign of him, for any sign of a struggle, an overturned lamp, a scuff mark on the wall. Anything. But there was nothing. The room was unnervingly neat, except for the mountains of money neatly stacked on the bed's faded floral comforter. Evelyn hadn't moved a muscle. She just stood there, her posture perfectly erect, the briefcase still clutched in her hand. Her expensive designer suit looked as out of place here as Mark's Audi did in the parking lot. She stared at me, her eyes, the color of a stormy gray sea, completely unreadable. There was no fear, no panic, just a flicker of annoyance, as if I were a cockroach that had just skittered across her immaculate floor. "Clara," she said, her voice a low, smooth murmur that was somehow more menacing than a shout. "What a surprise! I didn't realize this was on your list of approved venues." Her words were laced with a sarcasm so sharp it could cut glass. She was mocking me, my profession, my very presence in her secret world. The fear for Mark's safety evaporated, replaced by a fresh wave of confusion and a slow-burning anger. "Where is he?" I demanded, my voice coming out shakier than I intended. "Where is my husband? What is all this?" I gestured wildly at the bed, at the stacks of cash that seemed to mock the very concept of our mortgage and our carefully planned retirement fund. She allowed herself a small, cold smile. It didn't reach her eyes. "Your husband," she said, drawing the words out slowly, "is exactly where he needs to be. As for this," she gave a delicate, dismissive wave of her hand towards the money. "This is business. Something I wouldn't expect you to understand. Now, if you'll excuse me, you've interrupted a very sensitive transaction." She started to turn away, to pack the money into her briefcase, as if my questions were irrelevant, as if I had no right to be there. But I wasn't going to be dismissed. Not this time. For years, I had been the polite, accommodating wife, the woman who smiled and nodded and kept the peace. That woman died the moment I saw Mark's car in this parking lot. "I'm not leaving until you tell me where Mark is," I said, taking a step into the room and letting the door click shut behind me. The sound echoed with a grim finality. I was crossing a line, and I knew it. But I couldn't go back. Evelyn sighed, a sound of pure exasperation, like a mother dealing with a petulant child. She placed the briefcase on the small, rickety table by the window and turned to face me fully. "Fine," she said, her voice hardening. "You want to know? Your husband is a coward. He was supposed to be here to finalize this deal, but at the last minute, he lost his nerve. He called me, babbling about his conscience and his moral compass. Pathetic. Every word was a calculated blow. She was painting a picture of my husband as a weak, sniveling fool, and a part of me, the part that had seen him buckle under her pressure for months, knew it was true. But what was this deal? Why did it require a clandestine meeting in a seedy motel with a fortune in cash? "What deal?" I pressed, my voice gaining strength. "What have you gotten him into?" She laughed then, a short, sharp, humorless sound. "What have I gotten him into? Oh, Clara, you're adorable. Your husband came to me. He was drowning in debt, terrified of losing this comfortable little life you've both built. He was the one who was willing to do anything to secure his future. To secure your future." She let that hang in the air, the implication as ugly as the peeling wallpaper. My mind reeled. Debt? We weren't in debt. We were comfortable. We had savings, investments. We lived well within our means. I handled our finances. I would know if we were drowning. It was a lie. It had to be a lie, a cruel tactic to throw me off balance, to manipulate me. "We are not in debt," I said, the words firm, a statement of fact. Evelyn simply raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "Are you sure about that?" she asked, her voice dripping with pity. "Perhaps you should ask Mark about his private investments, about his hobbies, about the accounts you don't have access to." The world tilted on its axis. An entire landscape of my marriage, a landscape I thought I knew like the back of my hand, was suddenly foreign territory. Secret accounts? Hobbies? Was it gambling? Another woman? My imagination, a fertile ground for anxiety, began to sprout terrifying possibilities. I felt a wave of nausea. I had to lean against the doorframe to steady myself. Evelyn saw my weakness and pounced. "Look at you," she said, her tone softening into a faux sympathy that was more insulting than her open contempt. "You really had no idea. Poor thing. He was just trying to protect you." She picked up one of the stacks of bills, fanning it out like a deck of cards. This was his solution. A one-time deal to erase all his mistakes and get us a significant advantage over our biggest competitor. A win-win. But, as I said, he got cold feet. So I had to come and handle it myself. The pieces were starting to click into place, forming a picture I didn't want to see. This wasn't a ransom. It was a payoff. Or a bribe. Something illegal. Something that could land them both in prison. And Mark had been so deep in whatever mess he'd created that he was willing to do this, and then he'd been too scared to go through with it. "So you're telling me," I said, my voice barely a whisper, "that my husband is involved in something criminal, and he was supposed to meet you here, but he bailed, and now you're here alone with all this cash?" Evelyn nodded, a slow, deliberate movement. "That about sums it up. Now you see why your presence here is problematic." She started packing the money away again, her movements quick and efficient. "I suggest you go home, Clara. Forget you saw any of this. Forget you ever came here. For your own good. And for Mark's." It was a threat, veiled in a thin layer of concern. A warning to the nosy little wife to go back to her flower arrangements and her dinner parties and leave the real world to the grown-ups. But her threat had the opposite effect. It ignited the fear and confusion into a cold, hard flame of anger. She thought I was just some fragile doll he was trying to protect. She thought I would just scurry away because she told me to. She had no idea who I was. "No," I said, pushing myself off the doorframe. "I don't think I will." I pulled out my phone. My hands were shaking, but my finger was steady as I unlocked the screen. "I think I'll just wait here for Mark. We have a lot to talk about. And while I wait, maybe I'll just take a few pictures. For insurance." I aimed the camera at her, at the open briefcase, at the stacks of money on the bed. Evelyn froze, her hand hovering over a stack of bills. The mask of cool indifference finally cracked, and for the first time, I saw a flash of genuine fury in her eyes. The gray sea was now a raging tempest. "You have no idea what you're doing," she hissed, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You are playing a game you cannot possibly win. Put the phone away. Now." But I held my ground. For the first time in a long time, I felt a surge of power. I was no longer the victim in this story. I was a player, and I was about to change the rules of the game. "The phone stays right here," I said, my voice as cold and steady as hers had been just moments before. "Now, why don't you start from the beginning? And this time tell me everything. Because I'm not just Mark's wife. I'm the one who's going to decide what happens next." The air in that cheap motel room crackled with a tension so thick I felt I could taste it, a metallic, bitter flavor, like old blood and fear. For a long second, Evelyn Vance and I were locked in a silent battle of wills. She was a predator, sizing up a creature she had mistaken for prey, only to find that it had suddenly grown teeth. Her perfectly composed face, usually a mask of serene authority, was now tight with a fury she could barely contain. The stormy gray of her eyes had darkened to a thunderous charcoal. I could see the muscles in her jaw working, clenching and unclenching, as she processed this new, defiant version of Clara, Mark's mousy little wife. My phone felt heavy in my hand, both a weapon and a shield. The simple act of holding it up had shifted the entire dynamic of the room. I was no longer an intruder. I was a threat. "Put the phone down, Clara," she said again, her voice a low, dangerous growl. It was the voice of a CEO used to immediate, unquestioning obedience. "You are meddling in things that are so far above your pay grade, you can't even fathom the consequences." It was a classic Evelyn tactic, one Mark had described to me countless times. Belittle your opponent, make them feel small, stupid, and insignificant. But the tactic that worked on her ambitious, insecure employees wasn't going to work on a wife who had just discovered her entire life was a lie. A bitter laugh escaped my lips. It sounded harsh and unfamiliar even to my own ears. "My pay grade?" I shot back, my voice dripping with a sarcasm that mirrored her own. "My pay grade involves planning weddings for people who actually love each other and managing a household you and my husband seem determined to burn to the ground. So please, forgive me if I'm a little concerned about the consequences." My defiance seemed to surprise her. She took a different approach, her expression softening almost imperceptibly. A calculated shift from predator to reluctant ally. "Listen to me," she said, taking a small step forward, her hands raised in a placating gesture. "You're angry. You're hurt. I get it. But you're aiming your anger at the wrong person. Mark is the one who lied to you. He's the one who put us all in this position. You and I, we are the ones left to clean up his mess. We're on the same side here." It was a masterful pivot. In an instant, she tried to reframe the narrative, casting herself and me as the competent women betrayed by a weak, foolish man. It was tempting. A part of me, the part that was so blindingly furious with Mark, wanted to believe her. But I saw the lie in her eyes. There was no solidarity there, only strategy. She wasn't my ally, she was a chess master, and I was just a pawn she was trying to maneuver back into its box. "Don't," I said, my voice sharp, cutting through her performance. "Don't you dare pretend we're on the same side. The only side you're on is your own. Now, I'm going to ask you one more time. What is this deal? What did Mark get himself into, and where is he now?" I held the phone up a little higher, my thumb hovering over the record button. I didn't know the first thing about corporate law or blackmail, but I knew the power of evidence. Evelyn stared at my phone, then back at me. I could almost see the gears turning in her brilliant, ruthless mind as she calculated her odds, weighing the risk of my ignorance against the risk of my knowledge. Finally, with a sigh that was pure theater, a sigh that said, "I am being forced to explain complex matters to a simpleton," she relented. "It's not a deal," she said, walking over to the room's only chair and sinking into it, the picture of weary frustration. "It's a lifeline. Our biggest competitor, a company called Cygnus, is about to launch a product that will make our flagship software obsolete. It will bankrupt us, Clara. Years of work, thousands of jobs, all down the drain." She painted a dire picture, the kind of corporate doomsday scenario Mark used to talk about in hushed, anxious tones. "But," she continued, leaning forward, her eyes gleaming with a fanatic intensity, "we found a way to survive. We found a weakness. A disgruntled lead engineer at Cygnus. He has access to their prototype, their source code, everything. He was willing to sell it to us. For a price." She gestured to the money still sitting on the bed. $2 million. In cash. A small price to pay to save an empire. The scale of it was staggering. This wasn't just a bribe, it was high-stakes corporate espionage, the kind of thing you see in movies, not in a dingy motel room on a Tuesday night. "And Mark?" I asked, my throat dry. What was his role in this? Evelyn's lips twisted into a sneer. "The engineer. He was an old college friend of Mark's. A bitter rival, from what I gather. He would only deal with Mark. He didn't trust anyone else. Mark was the key. He set up the meeting. He was supposed to make the exchange. This was his chance to be a hero, to save the company and solve all his other problems at the same time. There it was again. His other problems. The debt she'd mentioned. "What debt, Evelyn?" I demanded. "I manage our finances. We don't have any debt." She let out a long, slow breath, as if the weight of my naivete was physically exhausting her. "Oh, Clara," she said, her voice laced with a condescending pity that made my skin crawl. "You manage the household finances. You manage the joint accounts. You have no idea what he's been doing on the side. Do you remember that brilliant little startup he launched 5 years ago? The one that was going to revolutionize the solar energy market? The one he told you he folded because he got a better offer at our firm?" I nodded, numbly. Of course I remembered. I had been so proud of him for taking the risk, and so understanding when he said it didn't work out. It was just another part of our story. But Evelyn was smiling that cold, cruel smile again. "He didn't fold it, Clara. It crashed and burned. He lost everything. Not just his own investment, but money he borrowed from unsavory sources. He spent the last 4 years desperately trying to pay it back, juggling loans, taking out secret lines of credit, all without you knowing. He's been robbing Peter to pay Paul, and Peter is getting very, very impatient." The room spun. Every memory of the last 4 years was suddenly cast in a new, sinister light. The expensive gifts after he'd been distant for weeks, were they apologies, or were they meant to distract me? The times he'd seemed so stressed and withdrawn, which I'd attributed to his demanding job, was it work? Or was it the crushing weight of a secret financial ruin? The man I had married, the man I thought I shared everything with, had built a second life of lies right under my nose. I was his partner, but I hadn't been his confidant. I had been his cover story. He was trying to protect you, Evelyn added, her voice soft and persuasive again. All of this? The deal, the risk? It was all to wipe the slate clean so he wouldn't have to confess his failure to you, so you could keep your beautiful house, your perfect little life. She was trying to make him sound noble, like a tragic hero, but all I could hear was the echo of his lies. He hadn't been protecting me. He had been protecting his own ego. He was too proud, too much of a coward to admit he had failed. The anger returned, sharp and clear, cutting through the fog of shock and pain. So he used his position at your company to orchestrate a crime, and when it came time to actually do the dirty work, he panicked and left you to handle it? I summarized, my voice dripping with contempt for them both. Precisely, Evelyn confirmed, standing up. She began to pack the last of the cash into the briefcase, her movements brisk and decisive now that the story was out. He's probably halfway to Mexico by now, terrified that the engineer will expose him, or that the people he owes money to will finally catch up with him. So, you see, Clara, you have a choice. You can blow this whole thing up, send me and what's left of the company down in flames, and ensure your husband becomes a wanted fugitive for the rest of his life. Or, you can be smart. You can walk out that door, go home, and when Mark finally crawls back with his tail between his legs, you can pretend this night never happened. She snapped the briefcase shut. The sound was like a gunshot in the silent room. The choice is yours, she said, holding the case in her hand. But I'd think very carefully about what you stand to lose. And just as she finished her sentence, a sound pierced the thick, stale air of the room. It was a phone ringing, but it wasn't mine, and it wasn't hers. The sound was coming from the nightstand next to the bed. It was Mark's personal phone, the one he must have left behind in his haste to flee. And the screen was lit up with a picture of me and a single word. Wifey. He was calling. And in that one heart-stopping moment, I knew I couldn't just walk away. I had to answer. The chirpy, upbeat ringtone, a song from a band we'd seen on our first date, was a grotesque parody of the moment. It was a sound from a different lifetime. A lifetime that had ended for me the second I saw his car in the parking lot. Evelyn and I both froze, our eyes locked on the glowing screen of the phone on the nightstand. Wifey. The name he'd programmed in years ago. A name that once made me feel cherished, now felt like a brand, marking me as the fool he'd so easily deceived. My mind was a frantic battlefield of conflicting impulses. One part of me wanted to snatch the phone and scream at him, to unleash the torrent of betrayal and rage that was choking me. Another part wanted to hurl it against the wall and watch it shatter, just like he had shattered our marriage. And yet another, a small, terrified part, wanted Evelyn to pick it up, to lie, to handle it, to make it all go away so I could crawl back into the blissful ignorance I'd been living in just an hour ago. Evelyn, ever the strategist, recovered first. Don't touch it, she commanded, her voice a low hiss. Let it go to voicemail. We don't know what he's going to say. We can't risk him knowing you're here. Her logic was sound. From her perspective, my presence was an unforeseen complication, a variable she couldn't control. If Mark knew I was there, the entire situation could spiral out of her grasp. But her command was a spark on dry tinder. I was done being told what to do. I was done having my life dictated by the secrets and lies of my husband and his manipulative boss. This was my marriage, my future, my husband on the other end of that line. I was going to answer my own damn phone call. With a defiant glare at Evelyn, I strode to the nightstand, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I snatched up the phone, my thumb swiping across the screen to accept the call just before it could roll to voicemail. Mark? I said, my voice surprisingly calm and steady, a stark contrast to the hurricane raging inside me. I put the call on speakerphone, setting the phone back down on the nightstand so Evelyn could hear every word. I wanted her to be a witness. I wanted her to understand that her control over this situation was officially over. There was a pause on the other end of the line, then the sound of a shaky, ragged breath. Clara? Oh, thank God. I didn't think you'd pick up. His voice was a wreck. It was thin and reedy, laced with a panic so raw it was almost palpable. This wasn't the confident, charming Mark I knew. This was the voice of a cornered animal. Why wouldn't I pick up, Mark? I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. You're my husband. I was worried. You were supposed to be at a conference in the city, remember? I let the words hang there, a pointed reminder of his lie. I glanced at Evelyn. She was standing perfectly still, her face a thundercloud, her eyes burning holes into the phone as if she could incinerate it with her gaze. I know, I'm so sorry, Clara, he stammered, his words tumbling over each other in a frantic rush. Something came up. I can't explain right now, but I need you to listen to me. This is important. Are you at home? The question sent a chill down my spine. Yes, I lied. My eyes locked with Evelyn's. Of course. I'm at home. Where are you? There was another pause, filled with the sound of what I recognized as wind whipping past a car's microphone. He was driving. Fast. I can't tell you, he said, his voice dropping to a desperate whisper. It's better if you don't know. But listen, I've made a terrible mistake. I got involved in something bad, with Evelyn. The way he said her name with a mix of fear and resentment confirmed everything she had told me. I thought it was the only way out, Clara. I was trying to fix things. For us. But it's all gone wrong. It's too much. I can't do it. His confession, pathetic and self-serving as it was still a punch to the gut. For us. He had the audacity to claim his criminal actions were for us. What do you want me to do, Mark? I asked, my voice devoid of any emotion. I was an automaton, a machine processing information. The pain would come later. Right now, I needed clarity. I need you to pack a bag, he said, his voice urgent. Just the essentials. Passports? Some cash if you have it? I have a go bag in the back of my closet, behind the winter coats. There's more cash in there. I'm going to be off the grid for a while. I have to lay low until this blows over, and then I'll call you. I'll tell you where to meet me. We can start over somewhere. Brazil? Maybe? Or Thailand? Somewhere they can't find us. He was delusional. He was living in a spy movie fantasy. A fantasy where the consequences of his actions could simply be outrun. He thought we could just pack a bag and disappear, leaving the wreckage of our lives behind. He had no concept of the reality of what he'd done. Who is they, Mark? I asked, my voice like ice. Who are you running from? Evelyn? The police? Or these unsavory sources she told me about? The silence on the other end was absolute. I had just revealed my hand. I knew. I was with her. I could almost hear his mind short-circuiting as he tried to comprehend how his two separate worlds, the one with his dutiful wife at home and the one with his criminal boss in a motel room, had collided. What? He finally croaked, his voice a strangled gasp. What are you talking about? How do you... Are you... He couldn't even finish the sentence. Evelyn chose that moment to make her move. She stepped forward, her voice cutting through the speakerphone, sharp and commanding. You pathetic coward, she spat. You left your phone, and now you've led your wife straight to me. You have created a mess of catastrophic proportions. Mark's reaction was instantaneous. A choked, terrified sound, like a man who had just seen a ghost. Evelyn? No. 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 Clara, get out of there. You don't understand who she is. You have to get away from her right now. The irony was so thick it was suffocating. He, the liar, the criminal, the coward, was trying to warn me about the woman he had dragged into our lives. He was trying to play the hero, the protector, after he had been the one to light the fuse on the bomb that was now detonating our entire existence. It's a little late for that, Mark, I said, my voice weary. I'm already here. I've already seen the $2 million you were supposed to be delivering. I already know about the corporate espionage. I know everything. I didn't know everything. Not even close. But in that moment, I needed him to believe I did. I needed to maintain some semblance of control. "You have to listen to me," he pleaded, his voice cracking with desperation. "That money isn't just for the engineer. There are other people involved. The people I owe. They're not bankers, Clara. They're dangerous. They fronted the money for this deal. They expect a return on their investment. If they don't get their money back, with interest, they won't just come after me. They'll come after you." And there it was. The final, horrifying piece of the puzzle. This wasn't just a white-collar crime. Mark hadn't just borrowed money from a loan shark. He had entered into a partnership with organized crime. He had used their money to fund a bribe. And now he had run off, leaving Evelyn holding the bag, and leaving me, his wife, as collateral. The stale, cheap motel room suddenly felt like a tomb. The buzzing of the television faded into a dull roar in my ears. I looked at Evelyn. Her face was pale, the first genuine crack in her icy facade. Even she, the ruthless CEO, had not fully understood the depths of the danger Mark had dragged them into. He hadn't just been a coward. He had been a fool who had just signed a potential death warrant for all of us. And in the middle of this terrifying revelation, a new sound joined the cacophony. A loud, heavy banging on the motel room door. It wasn't a polite knock. It was the sound of someone trying to break the door down. Mark heard it through the phone. "Oh my God," he whispered, his voice dissolving into pure terror. "They found you. They're here." The pounding on the door was like a physical blow, each impact vibrating through the flimsy walls of the motel room and deep into my bones. It was a violent, impatient sound. The sound of men who were not there to talk. My blood ran cold. The abstract threat Mark had just described over the phone had materialized with terrifying speed. They were here. For a split second, the three of us, me, Evelyn, and Mark's disembodied voice on the phone, were frozen in a tableau of pure panic. The talk show host on the TV was laughing about some celebrity mishap, a sound so jarringly normal it felt like it was from another dimension. Then, survival instinct kicked in, overriding the paralysis. "Who is it?" Evelyn hissed at the phone, her voice tight with a control that was fraying at the edges. She was no longer the untouchable CEO. She was a woman trapped in a room with $2 million and a ticking time bomb on the other side of the door. "I don't know," Mark wailed, his voice distorted by static and terror. "It's them. It has to be them. They must have followed me. Or they put a tracker on the money. Clara, you have to hide! Get in the bathroom! Lock the door!" His frantic instructions were useless. The flimsy bathroom door in a cheap motel wouldn't stop a determined child, let alone the kind of men who fronted $2 million for a criminal enterprise. The pounding intensified, accompanied by a low, guttural voice shouting, "Open up! We know you're in there! We just want to talk business!" The voice was calm, almost friendly, but it held an undercurrent of menace that was more terrifying than any scream. These were not common thugs. They were professionals. Evelyn's mind, always 3 steps ahead, was already working. Her eyes darted around the room, assessing every angle, every option. She looked at the briefcase full of money, then at me, then at the single window at the back of the room. It was a small, grimy window that looked out onto a dark, overgrown alley. "The window," she mouthed, her expression grim. "It's our only way out." She grabbed the briefcase and her own purse in one fluid motion. "Mark," she snapped into the phone, "stay on the line." "We're going out the back. Where are you? We need a rendezvous point." "I'm on the interstate, heading south," he said, his voice still a panicked squeak. "I don't know." "The old cannery off Route 9. It's abandoned. Meet me there." Suddenly, a loud crack splintered the air as the wood around the door lock began to give way. There was no more time. Evelyn didn't hesitate. She kicked off her ridiculously expensive high heels, her movements suddenly agile and athletic. She ran to the window, unlocked it, and with a grunt of effort, slid it open. A gust of cold, damp night air rushed into the room, carrying the smell of rain and decay. "Go," she ordered me, shoving me towards the opening. "Get out. Now." My body moved before my brain could fully process it. I was a mess of tangled fear and adrenaline. I scrambled through the narrow opening, my knees scraping against the rough sill, and tumbled ungracefully into the muddy alley behind the motel. The ground was soft and littered with broken glass and trash. The stench of a nearby dumpster filled my nostrils. A moment later, Evelyn followed, landing with a surprising lightness for a woman in a designer suit. She still had the briefcase clutched in one hand and Mark's phone in the other. Just as we straightened up, we heard the motel room door crash open, followed by the sound of heavy footsteps and angry, muffled shouts. We didn't wait to hear more. We ran. We sprinted down that dark, filthy alley, our feet slipping in the mud, our lungs burning. The only light was the faint, intermittent glow from the motel's neon sign, casting long, distorted shadows that seemed to chase us. We burst out of the alley and onto a side street, gasping for air. "My car is across the street," I panted, pointing towards the spot where I had left my sensible, reliable sedan. It looked like a lifeboat in a sea of chaos. "No," Evelyn said, shaking her head, her eyes scanning the street. "They'll be looking for your car. And for Mark's Audi. We need something they won't expect." Her eyes landed on a beat-up, rusty pickup truck parked at the curb, a faded for sale sign with a phone number taped to the window. In a move that completely stunned me, she pulled a small, thin piece of metal from a hidden pocket in her blazer. "Get in," she said, her voice all business. "What are you doing?" I asked, bewildered. "Hot wiring a truck," she replied, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. I picked up a few useful skills during a rather misspent youth. "Now, are you getting in, or are you going to stand there and get us both killed?" I scrambled into the passenger seat without another word. The truck smelled of stale coffee and motor oil. The upholstery was ripped, and the dashboard was cracked. While Evelyn worked under the steering column, her face illuminated by the faint glow of her phone's flashlight, I looked back at the motel. Two large, burly men in dark suits were coming out of our room. They looked around, their movements calm and methodical, like wolves searching for a trail. One of them pointed towards the parking lot, towards Mark's car. My heart leaped into my throat. They hadn't found us yet, but they would. "Hurry," I urged Evelyn, my voice a frantic whisper. "Just a second," she muttered, her brow furrowed in concentration. "It's been a while." There we go. With a cough and a sputter, the truck's engine roared to life. The sound was deafening, a rattling, wheezing noise that seemed to announce our presence to the entire world. Evelyn didn't waste a second. She slammed the truck into gear, and we peeled away from the curb, the tires squealing in protest. As we rounded the corner, I risked one last look back. The two men were now standing by my car. One of them was on the phone, no doubt reporting that the birds had flown the coop. We were in the clear, for now, but we were fugitives, driving a stolen truck, with a briefcase full of cartel money, on our way to meet my coward of a husband at an abandoned cannery. This wasn't my life. This couldn't be my life. I was an event planner. I coordinated color palettes and seating charts. The most dangerous situation I usually faced was a disgruntled mother of the bride. "Who are they, Evelyn?" I asked, my voice trembling as the adrenaline began to recede, leaving a cold, hard knot of fear in its place. "You heard Mark," she said, her eyes fixed on the road, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. "They're not bankers. They're associates of the Valenti family." My blood turned to ice. The Valenti family wasn't just some local bookie operation. They were one of the most ruthless, organized crime syndicates on the East Coast. They were involved in everything from drug trafficking to money laundering. And my husband, my quiet, bookish, cedarwood-scented husband, had borrowed money from them. "How?" I whispered, the question hanging in the dusty air of the truck. How did he even get involved with people like that? Evelyn let out a short, sharp breath. His failed startup. He was desperate. He took a loan from a subsidiary they control. He thought he could pay it back quickly, but the interest was astronomical. He got in over his head. When the Cygnus opportunity came up, they saw a chance to get their money back, and then some. They fronted the cash for the bribe, with the understanding that they would get their $2 million back, plus a hefty percentage of the profits once we acquired the tech. So that was the whole ugly story. Mark hadn't just made a mistake. He had made a deal with the devil, and now the devil had come to collect. And the lavender scent? I asked, the small, seemingly insignificant detail suddenly feeling immensely important. Evelyn glanced at me, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. "That's my perfume," she said quietly. "It's a custom blend, Mark." He said it calmed his nerves. He started wearing a bit of it himself before big meetings, a little habit he picked up. The revelation was so mundane, so domestic. It was almost more shocking than the crime itself. The scent of his betrayal wasn't the scent of another woman. It was the scent of his ambition, his fear, his weakness. It was the scent of her. For 12 years, my scent had been vanilla and sandalwood, but in the end, it was the smell of lavender that had defined the man he had become. The silence stretched between us, filled only by the rattling of the old truck and the sound of the rain starting to fall, streaking the dirty windshield like tears. We were two women from two completely different worlds bound together by the catastrophic failure of one man. And we were driving into the heart of a storm he had created, with no idea if any of us would make it out alive. The drive to the abandoned cannery was the longest 20 minutes of my life. The world outside the truck's grimy windows was a blur of wet asphalt and streaking headlights. The rain was coming down in sheets now, a relentless, punishing downpour that matched the turmoil in my soul. Every car that passed, every flicker of light in my rearview mirror sent a fresh jolt of paranoia through me. Were they behind us? How had they found us so fast? The old pickup truck felt less like a clever disguise and more like a rattling death trap, its noisy engine a beacon in the night. Evelyn drove with a focused, unnerving calm. Her earlier flicker of panic was gone, replaced by the same icy resolve she probably used to gut her corporate rivals. She was back in her element. Crisis management. While I was falling apart, she was processing, planning, strategizing. "He's an idiot," she said suddenly, her voice cutting through the rhythmic thumping of the worn-out windshield wipers. "A complete and utter fool. To think he could outsmart the Valentis. To think he could just run. It's suicide." There was no sympathy in her voice, only a cold, pragmatic assessment of the situation. She wasn't worried about Mark the person. She was annoyed by Mark the liability. "Why did you trust him?" I asked, the question bubbling up from a deep well of confusion. "You're Evelyn Vance. You're supposed to be a genius at reading people. How could you not see this coming?" She was silent for a moment, her eyes fixed on the dark, slick road ahead. "I didn't see him," she said, her voice dropping a notch, becoming more reflective, almost human. "I saw a tool, a man who was desperate, ambitious, and had the one connection I needed. Desperate men are useful. You can mold them, motivate them with their own fear. I thought his fear of failure, his fear of you finding out the truth, would be enough to keep him in line. I miscalculated. I underestimated the depth of his cowardice. Her honesty was brutal. She had used my husband, played on his weaknesses, and it had backfired on all of us. There was no comfort in it, only a shared sense of doom. We were both victims of his weakness, albeit in very different ways. I had lost my marriage. She was about to lose her empire, and possibly her life. We turned off the main highway and onto a narrow, unpaved road. The truck bumped and swayed over potholes filled with muddy water. The trees on either side of the road were dark, skeletal figures, their branches clawing at the night sky. Up ahead, I could see the silhouette of the cannery. It was a huge, derelict structure. Its windows, like vacant eyes, its corrugated metal walls rusted and peeling. It looked like something out of a horror movie. Evelyn killed the engine and the headlights, plunging us into near-total darkness. We coasted the last 100 yards, the only sound the crunch of gravel under our tires. She pulled the truck in behind a crumbling brick wall, out of sight from the main road. "Stay here," she ordered, grabbing the briefcase. "I'll go in first. Make sure it's secure." "No," I said, my voice firm. "I'm coming with you. This is my husband we're talking about. I'm not waiting in the car like a child." For a second, I thought she was going to argue, but she just gave me a long, appraising look and then nodded curtly. "Fine, but stay behind me, and don't make a sound." We got out of the truck, the rain instantly soaking our clothes. The air was cold and smelled of wet rust and mildew. We moved like ghosts through the shadows, our feet sinking into the soft, muddy ground. The main entrance to the cannery was a massive, sliding metal door that was rusted half open. We slipped through the gap and into the cavernous space inside. The interior was even more menacing than the outside. It was a vast, dark space filled with the hulking shapes of old machinery. Conveyor belts, vats, and sorting tables, all covered in a thick layer of dust and cobwebs, stood like silent, industrial dinosaurs. The only light came from the faint moonlight filtering through the grime-cates windows high above. The only sound was the dripping of water from the leaky roof, each drop echoing in the oppressive silence. "Mark?" Evelyn called out, her voice sharp and clear, echoing strangely in the huge space. "Mark, are you here? It's us." There was no answer. Only the drip, drip, drip of the water. A new, terrible fear began to creep into my heart. What if the Valentis had gotten here first? What if we were walking into a trap? We moved deeper into the cannery, our footsteps unnervingly loud on the concrete floor. We navigated through the maze of silent machinery, the beams of our phone flashlights cutting through the darkness, illuminating swirling dust motes. And then we saw him. He was huddled in a corner, behind a massive, rusted vat, sitting on the floor with his head in his hands. He was a pathetic, broken figure, his expensive suit now rumpled and stained with mud. When he heard us approach, he looked up, his face a mess of terror and relief. "Clara!" he cried, scrambling to his feet and rushing towards me. "You're okay! I was so worried!" He tried to pull me into a hug, but I instinctively recoiled, putting a hand up to stop him. The scent of him cedarwood, whiskey, fear, and that faint trace of lavender was nauseating. All the love I had ever felt for this man had curdled into a toxic mix of pity and disgust. "Don't touch me," I said, my voice flat and dead. His face crumpled. The relief was replaced by a look of wounded confusion, as if he couldn't understand why I wasn't falling into his arms, ready to forgive and forget. "Mark, you have a lot of explaining to do," I said. But before he could answer, Evelyn stepped forward. "All business. There's no time for a domestic dispute," she snapped, dropping the briefcase at his feet with a heavy thud. "Did you bring it?" Mark looked from her to me, then nodded numbly. He reached into his suit jacket and pulled out a small, sleek, silver object. It looked like a high-tech external hard drive. "This is it," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "The prototype. All the source code is on here." He held it out to Evelyn, his hand trembling. "So what now? We give this to the engineer. He gives us the rest of the data, and this is all over?" Evelyn took the drive, examining it under her phone's light. "It's not that simple, you fool," she said, not looking up. "The Valentis aren't just going to walk away. They want their money. And a profit. We have to find a way to pay them back before they find us." "But how?" Mark asked, his voice cracking. "The 2 million is right there. We can just give it back to them." "And tell them what?" Evelyn shot back, her voice dripping with scorn. "Sorry, the deal fell through. Here's your money back. Have a nice day." They don't work like that. They'll want compensation for their trouble. A lot of compensation. And they will take it out of our hides, literally, if we don't produce a result. As she spoke, a beam of light swept across the far end of the cannery. Headlights. A car was pulling up the unpaved road. We all froze, our breath catching in our chests. We were trapped. There was no back window to crawl out of this time. The car pulled up to the entrance, its engine cutting out, plunging the world back into darkness and silence. Then, a car door opened and slammed shut. Heavy footsteps crunched on the gravel outside. But there was only one set of footsteps, not two. A figure appeared in the gap of the rusted doorway, silhouetted against the faint moonlight. It was a man, tall and thin, wearing a long coat and a fedora, like something out of an old black and white movie. He walked into the cannery, his footsteps echoing on the concrete. "Mark, my friend," the man said, his voice smooth and cultured, but with a chilling lack of warmth. "You have caused a great deal of trouble for my employers, and for me. It wasn't one of the Valentis' thugs. I recognized the man's voice instantly. I had spent hours on the phone with him just last week, discussing canapes and champagne flutes. It was the caterer for the wedding I was planning. His name was Julian, and he was supposed to be a master of pastry, not a collector for the mob. And in that moment, I understood. This was so much worse than I could have ever imagined. The web of deceit wasn't just in Mark's corporate life. It had infiltrated my own. And the man I had been trusting with the intimate details of my client's most important day was a part of the nightmare that was trying to swallow us whole. The sight of Julian, my wedding caterer, standing in the derelict cannery like a specter from a film noir, was so profoundly bizarre, so utterly out of context, that for a moment, my brain refused to process it. This was Julian, the man who had waxed poetic about the subtle notes of raspberry in a white chocolate mousse. The man whose biggest concern, when I last spoke to him, was the precise shade of ivory for a fondant rose. To see him here, in this place of rust and shadows, radiating an aura of cold, quiet menace, was like watching a character from a romantic comedy wander onto the set of a gangster film. It was a complete and total system failure of my understanding of the world. Mark was the first to react. He let out a small, strangled gasp of recognition. Julian? What are you doing here? You work for them? His voice was a cocktail of disbelief and dawning horror. He was looking at Julian not as a caterer, but as the embodiment of the unsavory sources he had so foolishly entangled himself with. Julian allowed a thin, reptilian smile to grace his lips. He took off his fedora, revealing a slick of dark, perfectly coiffed hair, and shook the rain from its brim. Work for them? He said, his voice echoing in the vast, empty space. That's a rather crude way of putting it, Mark. Let's just say Mr. Valenti and I have a long-standing business relationship. He appreciates fine food, and I appreciate efficient problem-solving. It's a symbiotic arrangement. He took a slow, deliberate step forward, his expensive leather shoes making almost no sound on the dusty concrete. His eyes, which I had always thought of as warm and artistic, were now cold, dark, and predatory. They flickered from Mark's terrified face to Evelyn's stony, calculating expression, and finally to me. Clara, he said, and my name on his lips now sounded like a threat. What an unexpected and disappointing development. I was under the impression you were a woman who valued discretion. The implication was clear. He knew I had been the one to orchestrate his catering contract for the upcoming high-profile wedding of a city councilman's daughter. He was reminding me that he was embedded in my world, my professional life, in a way I had never imagined. He wasn't just a monster in the shadows. He was a monster I had invited into the light, introduced to my clients, vouched for. The men at the motel, Evelyn stated, her voice tight. They were yours. It wasn't a question. Julian gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. My associates, they can be a bit overzealous, but they get results. They were supposed to retrieve Mr. Valenti's investment and the collateral. You led them on quite a chase. He glanced at the briefcase in Evelyn's hand. I assume that is the investment? Evelyn clutched the briefcase tighter. She was out of her depth, but she was too proud to show it. This wasn't a hostile takeover she could navigate with lawyers and spreadsheets. This was a world of violence and unspoken rules she didn't understand. The deal is still on the table, she said, her voice a little too loud, a little too brittle. We have the prototype. Once we acquire the technology and liquidate our competitors' assets, your employer will be repaid, with a substantial profit. Julian listened to her proposal with a look of polite boredom, as if she were a child trying to negotiate a later bedtime. Ah, yes, the deal, he said with a sigh. That brings us to the core of the problem. You see, when Mark here failed to show up for the exchange, he created a credibility issue. The engineer got spooked. He thought it was a setup. He called me, very upset, and renegotiated his terms. My heart sank. Julian had been the middleman for the engineer as well. He was playing both sides. Renegotiated how? Mark stammered, his face pale and slick with sweat. Julian's cold eyes settled on him. He no longer wants cash. Cash is messy, traceable. He wants something much more valuable. He wants a clean slate. He has some legal troubles of his own. He wants them to disappear. And he wants a new identity, a new life. Somewhere the U.S. government can't touch him. The scope of the conspiracy was expanding exponentially. This wasn't just about corporate espionage and mob loans anymore. It was about disappearing witnesses, forging documents, and international flight. That's impossible, Evelyn scoffed. We're a software company, not the CIA. We can't just create new identities. Julian's smile widened, but it held no warmth. Oh, I think you can, he said, his gaze shifting to the silver hard drive in Evelyn's other hand. That little device contains the source code for Cygnus's new security software. It's military-grade encryption, the kind of thing governments and certain private organizations would pay a fortune to get their hands on. More than enough to buy our engineer a new life and pay back Mr. Valenti with a handsome profit for everyone involved. He was a spider, and we were all caught in his intricate, sticky web. He had orchestrated the entire thing, manipulating Mark's desperation, leveraging the engineer's greed, and now he was using us to sell stolen military-grade technology on the black market. The $2 million in cash was just seed money. The real prize was the hard drive. You're insane, Mark whispered, shaking his head in disbelief. This was never just about saving the company. You were using us from the very beginning. Using you? Julian chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. Mark, I gave you an opportunity. A chance to be a man, to solve your problems, to save your pathetic, lie-filled life. But you were too weak. You ran. And now, your weakness has put everyone in a very precarious position. He took another step closer, and for the first time, I saw the bulge of a gun under his long coat. The reality of our situation crashed down on me with the force of a physical blow. We were witnesses. We knew too much. There was no scenario where he would simply let the three of us walk away. We were loose ends, and Julian was a man who seemed to pride himself on tying them up. Permanently. I had to do something. My mind, the event planner's mind that was always running through logistics and contingencies, went into overdrive. I scanned the dark, cavernous space, my eyes searching for a weapon, an escape route, anything. The hulking shapes of the old machinery, the rusted conveyor belts, the massive vats, and then my eyes landed on a small red box on a nearby support pillar, a fire alarm. It was an old, manual pull station. It was a long shot. The cannery was abandoned. The alarm might not even be connected, but it was the only chance we had. While Julian was focused on Evelyn and Mark, savoring his moment of triumph, I began to slowly, imperceptibly, back away. I moved one step at a time, my feet making no sound on the dusty floor, my body melting into the deep shadows cast by a giant piece of machinery. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. If he saw me, if he realized what I was doing, he would shoot me without a second thought. So, Evelyn said, her voice surprisingly steady. She was buying me time. She must have seen the look in my eyes, understood my desperate plan. What's your proposal, Julian? How do we proceed? Her question was a lifeline, drawing Julian's attention, giving me the precious seconds I needed. The proposal is simple, Julian said, turning his full attention back to her. You are going to give me the hard drive and the briefcase. Then, you and Mark are going to wait here, quietly, while I make a few phone calls to arrange the sale. Once the transaction is complete, and Mr. Valenti has his money, I will decide what to do with you. The unspoken threat was deafening. He was going to kill them. He was going to take the money and the tech, and he was going to eliminate the only two people who could link him to the crime. He hadn't mentioned me. In his arrogance, he had already dismissed me, the caterer's wife, as an insignificant detail. He had forgotten I was in the room. It was a fatal mistake. I was almost there. Just a few more feet. My hand was shaking so badly I was afraid I wouldn't be able to grip the handle. I took one final, silent step, my back pressing against the cold, rough concrete of the pillar. My fingers brushed against the cool metal of the alarm box. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and said a silent prayer. Then, with all the strength I could muster, I pulled the lever down. For a terrifying, heart-stopping second, nothing happened. The only sound was the drip, drip, drip of the water from the ceiling. I thought, it's not working. We're dead. But then, a sound erupted from the walls. A deafening, clanging, metallic screech. The sound of 1,000 rusty bells ringing at once. It was a sound from hell. A sound so loud and jarring it felt like it could tear the building apart. The fire alarm was working, and it was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard in my life. The shriek of the fire alarm was a physical assault. It was a brutal, industrial scream that clawed at our eardrums and seemed to make the very air in the cannery vibrate. Dust and rust flakes rained down from the high ceiling, disturbed by the violent sound waves. The effect on Julian was instantaneous. The mask of cool, reptilian control shattered. His head whipped around, his eyes wide with shock and fury as he saw me standing by the alarm, my hand still on the lever. For a crucial, life-saving second, he was disoriented, his meticulously planned operation thrown into chaos by the one variable he had failed to properly account for: me. That second was all Evelyn needed. She was not a woman who hesitated. While Julian was momentarily distracted, she acted with the swift, decisive violence of a cornered animal. She swung the heavy, metal briefcase, the one filled with $2 million in cash, like a medieval weapon. She put all of her weight behind the blow, aiming for Julian's head. The corner of the briefcase connected with his temple with a sickening, wet thud that was audible even over the caterwauling alarm. Julian staggered back, a look of pure astonishment on his face. He dropped the hard drive he had just taken from her, his hand flying to his head. He swayed on his feet, his eyes losing focus. He was stunned, but he wasn't down. With a guttural roar of pure rage, he reached inside his coat, his hand fumbling for the gun. But Mark, my cowardly, pathetic husband, finally did something right. Spurred by a surge of adrenaline or perhaps a primal instinct to save his own skin, he launched himself at Julian. It wasn't a heroic movie-style tackle. It was a clumsy, desperate, flailing lunge. He wrapped his arms around Julian's waist, his momentum carrying them both backward. They crashed into a stack of old wooden pallets, sending splinters and dust flying. The gun flew from Julian's grasp, skittering across the grimy concrete floor and coming to a rest near the base of a large, dark piece of machinery. The scene descended into pure, primitive chaos. The alarm was still blaring, a relentless, mind-numbing soundtrack to the violence. Mark and Julian were a tangle of limbs on the floor, grunting and cursing as they wrestled for dominance. Mark was fighting with the desperation of a man who knew he was about to be executed. Julian was fighting with the cold, efficient fury of a professional whose plan had just gone disastrously wrong. Evelyn didn't waste a moment. "Clara, the gun!" she screamed at me over the din. "Get the gun!" I was already moving. My feet, which had felt like lead just moments before, were now light. I scrambled across the floor, my eyes locked on the dark, metallic object. It was a simple equation of survival. If he got the gun, we were all dead. If we got the gun, we had a chance. I dove for it, my fingers wrapping around the cool, heavy steel of the grip, just as Julian threw Mark off him with a powerful shove. Mark hit the concrete with a cry of pain. Julian scrambled to his feet, his face a mask of blood and fury, his eyes locking on me. He lunged. I didn't have time to think. I just reacted. All those years ago, my father, a retired police officer, had insisted I take self-defense classes. "You never know, Clara," he'd said. "It's better to have it and not need it than to need it and not have it." I had thought it was just his old cop paranoia. But now, in this dark, terrifying place, his words came back to me. I remembered the stance, the grip, the way to hold my ground. I held the gun with both hands, just as I'd been taught, and pointed it at the center of his chest. "Stop!" I yelled, my voice shaking but loud. "Don't come any closer!" For a second, he actually froze, his eyes widening in surprise. He hadn't expected this. He had expected me to scream, to cry, to drop the gun. He hadn't expected me to stand my ground, but the hesitation only lasted a second. A cruel, contemptuous smirk spread across his bloody face. "You're not going to shoot me, Clara," he sneered, taking a slow, menacing step forward. "You're a party planner. You don't have the guts." He was right. I didn't want to shoot him. The thought of taking a human life, even his, was abhorrent. But the thought of him killing me, killing Evelyn, killing the pathetic man who was still my husband, was worse. I saw the faces of my clients, the brides and grooms whose happiest days I had helped create. I saw my father's face, his look of quiet pride. I saw my own life, a life I was not ready to give up. "Try me," I said, my voice as cold as the steel in my hands. The blaring of the alarm was suddenly joined by another sound, a sound from outside, the high-low wail of sirens. They were faint at first, but growing louder with every passing second. The alarm. It hadn't just been a distraction. It had been a summons. Someone, a passing car, a nearby resident, must have heard the old, disused cannery's alarm and called the police. Help was coming. The sound of the sirens had a profound effect on everyone. Julian's face went from arrogant contempt to raw panic. His plan was in tatters. The police were coming. He was trapped. Mark, who had been groaning on the floor, looked up. His eyes filled with a desperate, pathetic glimmer of hope. And Evelyn. Evelyn was already thinking 3 moves ahead. "They're coming for the alarm," she said, her voice cutting through the noise. "All business. They don't know what's happening in here. Julian, you have one last chance. Give up. When they get here, we'll tell them it was a robbery. We'll leave out the details about Cygnus and the Valentis. You might get a few years, but you'll live." She was offering him a deal, a way out. But Julian was a cornered rat, and cornered rats don't make deals. They bite. "No witnesses," he snarled, his eyes darting between us, the gun in my hands, and the flashing blue and red lights that were now visible through the grimy windows. With a final, desperate roar, he lunged at me again. This time, I didn't hesitate. I didn't aim for his chest. I did what my father had taught me. Aim for the largest, easiest target to disable, not to kill. I squeezed the trigger. The sound of the gunshot was explosive, a deafening crack that was sharper and more final than any alarm. It ripped through the cannery, momentarily silencing everything else. Julian screamed, a high-pitched, agonized sound, and crumpled to the floor, clutching his leg. A dark, spreading stain was blossoming on his thigh. I had shot him. The realization hit me with a wave of nausea and a strange, terrifying sense of calm. I had actually shot another human being. The sirens were deafening now, right outside. Car doors slammed. Voices shouted commands. "This is the police! Everyone inside, come out with your hands up!" Evelyn moved quickly. She kicked the gun out of my trembling hands, sending it skittering away into the darkness. "Drop to the floor, Clara," she commanded. "Both of you! On your stomachs! Hands behind your head! Now!" I obeyed without question. My mind, a numb, buzzing void. I collapsed onto the cold, dusty concrete, the smell of cordite and blood filling my nostrils. Mark did the same, his body shaking with sobs. In the corner, Julian was moaning in pain. The last thing I saw before the police stormed in with their bright, blinding flashlights and their drawn weapons was Evelyn. She wasn't on the floor. She was standing calmly, her hands raised in the air, a picture of innocence. And as they put her in handcuffs, she looked over at me, her stormy gray eyes holding a look I couldn't quite decipher. It wasn't gratitude. It wasn't fear. It looked almost like respect. And in that chaotic, terrifying moment, I realized that our strange, unholy alliance was not over. It was just beginning. The aftermath was a blur of flashing lights, shouting voices, and the cold, institutional sterility of a police interrogation room. The world outside the cannery had descended upon us in a swarm of uniforms, paramedics, and detectives. Julian was taken away on a stretcher, cursing and groaning, his face a grotesque mask of pain and defeated rage. Mark, a blubbering, incoherent mess, was led to a separate squad car, his hands cuffed behind his back, and I was guided, gently but firmly, to another, my hands still trembling, the phantom weight of the gun a ghost in my palm. The hours that followed were a surreal marathon of questioning. I sat in a small, windowless room, a cup of lukewarm coffee growing cold in front of me, and told my story. I told it over and over, to a uniformed officer, then to a pair of grim-faced detectives, a man named Russo and a woman named Chen. I started from the beginning, the lavender scent, the missed anniversary, the sight of Mark's car at the motel. I told them about Evelyn, the cash, the corporate espionage, the Valenti family, and the terrifying confrontation in the cannery. I left nothing out. The lies, the fear, the desperation, I laid it all bare under the harsh fluorescent lights of that room. It was a confession, not of a crime, but of a life that had been built on a foundation of secrets. And as I spoke, a strange thing happened. The shame and humiliation began to recede, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. I was not the victim in this story. Not anymore. Russo and Chen listened with impassive faces, taking copious notes, their expressions unreadable. They were professionals, trained to listen to tales of human folly and depravity without judgment. But I could see a flicker of something in Detective Chen's eyes, a hint of empathy, perhaps. As I described the moment, I realized Mark had been lying to me for years. When I finished, the silence in the room was heavy. "It's quite a story, Mrs. Peterson," Russo said finally, leaning back in his chair. "Corporate espionage, organized crime, a respectable caterer who's a mob enforcer. It sounds like a movie." "I wish it were," I replied, my voice hoarse. "But it's my life." They left me alone for what felt like an eternity. I stared at the two-way mirror on the wall, wondering who was on the other side, watching, judging. I thought about Mark, somewhere else in this building, telling his own version of the story, a version, I was sure, that would be filled with self-pity and blame for everyone but himself. I thought about Evelyn. What story was she telling? She was a master manipulator, a brilliant strategist. She would be crafting a narrative that protected her, that minimized her involvement, that painted her as a victim of her subordinates' reckless behavior. And then I thought about Julian. He was the key. He was the link between Mark's white-collar crime and the Valenti's brutal underworld empire. If he talked, this whole thing could be contained. If he stayed silent, the Valenti family would remain a shadowy, untouchable threat. Finally, the door opened, and a new man entered. He was older, in an expensive, well-tailored suit, with silver hair and tired, intelligent eyes. He wasn't a cop. He had the quiet, confident air of a lawyer. "Mrs. Peterson," he said, extending a hand. "My name is Arthur Jennings. I represent Miss Evelyn Vance." I was so stunned, I didn't take his hand. Evelyn had a lawyer here already? Of course she did. She had probably called him from the back of the squad car. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice wary. "My client has been telling the detectives her version of events," he said, sitting down opposite me. "And her story corroborates yours in almost every detail. She has instructed me to offer you her full support." I stared at him, bewildered. Her support? Why? She used my husband. She put us all in this danger. "My client is a pragmatist, Mrs. Peterson," Jennings said, his voice smooth as silk. "She recognizes that you and she have a common enemy. The Valenti organization is not going to forget about their $2 million, nor will they forgive the man who exposed them, Julian. Julian is now a liability to them. And you, your husband, and my client are witnesses. Loose ends." The cold dread returned. The immediate danger in the cannery was over, but the larger threat remained. The Valentis were not going to let this go. "So what are you proposing?" I asked. "My client has certain resources," Jennings said, choosing his words carefully. "She has connections. She has made a deal. She will provide the district attorney's office with enough evidence on Julian and his associates to put them away for a very long time. In exchange for her testimony and cooperation, she will receive immunity for her role in the Cygnus matter. And what about me and Mark?" "That is where things get more complicated," he admitted. "Mark's involvement is undeniable. He will face charges. But with my client's testimony to his being coerced and manipulated by Julian, we can argue for a significantly reduced sentence. And you, Mrs. Peterson, you are the hero of this story. I flinched at the word. I shot a man. You acted in self-defense. Jennings corrected me gently. You defended yourself and others from a known violent felon. You will not be charged. In fact, the DA is prepared to offer you and your husband placement in the Witness Protection Program. The words hit me like a physical blow. Witness protection. A new life, a new name, a new identity, all because of my husband's catastrophic mistakes. It was a prison sentence of a different kind. What's the catch? I asked. Because with Evelyn Vance, there was always a catch. Jennings leaned forward. The catch, he said, is that the Valenti organization is bigger than just Julian. They have deep roots. The Witness Protection Program is good, but it's not infallible. My client believes there is a better, more permanent solution. She is prepared to use her own resources to neutralize the threat, to ensure that no one from the Valenti family ever bothers you again. Neutralize the threat. The euphemism was chilling. He was talking about something beyond the law. He was talking about a private war. And Evelyn wanted to fight it, not just to protect herself, but to protect me. Why? I asked again. The question a hoarse whisper. Why would she do that for me? Arthur Jennings looked at me, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of genuine emotion in his tired eyes. Because in that cannery, he said, you did something she didn't expect. You didn't just save yourself. You saved her. Evelyn Vance is not a woman who is used to being saved. And she is not a woman who forgets a debt. I was left alone again to process the impossible choice I had been given. I could disappear into the anonymous safety of a government program, my life forever defined by my husband's failure. Or I could place my trust in a ruthless corporate predator, a woman who had proven she was capable of anything, and hope that her strange, newfound sense of obligation was genuine. When Detective Chen came back into the room, her expression was softer, more human. Your husband has confessed to everything, she said quietly. He's taking full responsibility. He keeps saying he's sorry, that he was just trying to protect you. The words, which should have brought some small measure of comfort, felt hollow. His confession now was just another act of cowardice, a desperate attempt at absolution when it was far too late. I want to see him, I said. It wasn't a request. It was a demand. I needed to look him in the eye one last time. I needed to say goodbye to the man I had married, and to the life we had built. They led me to another interrogation room. Mark was sitting at the table, his head in his hands. He looked 10 years older. His face was gray and gaunt, his eyes red-rimmed and empty. When he saw me, he stood up, his handcuffs clinking. "Clara," he whispered, his voice broken. "I'm so sorry. I didn't say anything." I just stood there, looking at him, the stranger who had shared my bed for 12 years. I looked at the man who had smelled of cedarwood and old books, who had made me laugh with his terrible jokes, who had held my hand and promised to love and protect me forever. And I felt nothing. The love, the anger, the betrayal, it had all burned away, leaving behind a cold, empty ash. "Goodbye, Mark," I said, my voice as empty as my heart. I turned and walked out of the room, and out of his life, without looking back. I had made my decision. I was not going to run. I was not going to hide. I was going to trust the devil I knew. I was going to place my bet on Evelyn Vance, because in this dark, twisted new world I had been thrown into, she was the only one who seemed to know how to win. Walking out of that police station and into the cool, pre-dawn air was like being reborn into a different world. The city was quiet. The sky was just beginning to blush with the first hints of pink and orange. And for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, I could breathe. The immediate threat was gone, but I was standing at a crossroads, with the ruins of my old life behind me and two very different, very uncertain paths stretching out before me. Arthur Jennings was waiting for me on the steps, a black town car idling at the curb. He looked less like a lawyer and more like a character from a spy thriller, the calm, unflappable handler who manages the chaos from the shadows. "Have you made a decision, Mrs. Peterson?" he asked, his voice quiet and respectful. I looked at the sky, at the promise of a new day, and nodded. "I'm not going into any program," I said, my voice firm, resolute. "I'm not going to spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder, living in fear. Tell Evelyn I accept her offer." Jennings gave a small, almost imperceptible nod of approval. "A wise choice," he said. "Miss Vance is a woman of her word. She will handle the outstanding business with the Valenti family. It will be done quietly and permanently. You have my assurance." He opened the back door of the town car for me. "Where are we going?" I asked, hesitating for a moment. "To a safe location," he replied. "Miss Vance has arranged everything. You'll be comfortable and secure until this is all resolved. Think of it as a temporary sabbatical." The weeks that followed were the most surreal of my life. I was whisked away to a beautiful, secluded house in the countryside, a modern glass and steel structure surrounded by acres of forest. It was the kind of place you see in architecture magazines, a place of quiet, minimalist luxury. There were no guards in uniform, but I was aware of a quiet, discreet security presence. I had a chef, a housekeeper, and a library filled with more books than I could read in a year. I was a prisoner in a gilded cage. Evelyn visited me once, a week after the incident. She arrived by helicopter, landing on the perfectly manicured lawn like the corporate queen she was. She was dressed in casual, expensive sportswear, her hair pulled back in a sleek ponytail. She looked relaxed. "I trust you're comfortable," she said, as we sat on the patio overlooking a serene, private lake. It wasn't a question. It was a statement. "It's a step up from the Sleepy Hollow Motel," I replied dryly. She allowed herself a rare, genuine smile. "Indeed," she said. "I wanted to thank you, Clara. In the cannery, you acted. You didn't freeze. You saved my life. I don't like being indebted to people." "So this is you paying a debt?" I asked, gesturing to the luxurious surroundings. "This," she said, her voice serious, "is me protecting an asset. You proved you're a survivor. You're resourceful. I respect that. It's a rare quality." She told me that Julian, facing a life sentence, had cut a deal and given the authorities everything he knew about the Valenti organization's East Coast operations. The 2 thugs from the motel had been arrested. The Valenti family was in disarray, their leadership structure crippled by arrests and infighting. "They're wounded," Evelyn said, her eyes cold as ice. "And when an animal is wounded, that's when you finish it. My people are taking care of the rest. You have nothing to worry about." We sat in silence for a while, 2 women who should have been enemies, bound by a strange, shared trauma. "What will happen to Mark?" I asked finally. "With his testimony against Julian and the Valentis, the DA has agreed to a plea deal," she said. "He'll get 5 to 7 years in a minimum security facility. He'll be out in 3 with good behavior." 3 years. It seemed like an impossibly short time for the amount of destruction he had caused. But I felt no anger. I felt nothing at all when it came to him. He was a chapter of my life that was now closed. "And your company?" I asked. "The Cygnus Tech? The hard drive was, unfortunately, damaged during the altercation," she said, a faint, almost imperceptible smirk playing on her lips. "A tragic loss. Of course, the SEC is investigating, but without the evidence, it's just my word against a disgraced, imprisoned engineer. The company will survive. It will be battered, but it will survive. And when it recovers, it will be stronger than ever." Of course. She had destroyed the evidence. She had orchestrated the perfect cover-up. She would emerge from the ashes of this scandal, as always, on top. Before she left, she handed me a thick envelope. "What's this?" I asked. "It's a settlement," she said. "For your trouble. For the end of your marriage, the loss of your home. Consider it a severance package from the life you used to have. It's more than enough to start over. Anywhere you want, any way you want." I stayed at that house for another month, until Arthur Jennings informed me that the outstanding business had been concluded. The Valenti threat was gone. I was free. I never asked for the details. I didn't want to know. I took the money Evelyn had given me and I walked away from it all. I didn't go back to my old life. I couldn't. The house we had shared, the friends we had had, the very streets of the city were all tainted with the ghost of the man I had married. I needed a new start, a blank page. I moved across the country, to a small coastal town where nobody knew my name. I bought a little cottage with a garden that overlooked the ocean. I didn't go back to event planning. The thought of celebrating other people's perfect love stories felt like a lie. Instead, I opened a small flower shop. I spent my days surrounded by the simple, honest beauty of living things, hydrangeas, and roses, and, ironically, lavender. Its scent no longer held the ghost of betrayal. It was just a color, a fragrance, a plant that needed sun and water to grow. Sometimes, late at night, when the only sound is the rhythmic crash of the waves against the shore, I think about that night. I think about the fear, the chaos, the impossible choices, and I think about Evelyn Vance. I never saw her again, but I know she's out there running her empire, a brilliant, ruthless force of nature. We were never friends and we never will be, but we share a strange, unspoken bond, forged in the fire of one man's weakness. She gave me the means to escape, to rebuild, but I was the one who had to do the work. I was the one who had to learn to live with the scars, to find peace in the wreckage. My name is Clara, and this is my story. It's a story about how quickly a life can unravel, and how the person you think you know best can be a complete stranger. But it's also a story about finding a strength you never knew you had in the darkest of places. And it's a story about starting over. Because in the end, that's all any of us can do. We pick up the pieces, we take a deep breath, and we begin again.